In a world of phone cameras, digital manipulation, and automatic focus, there are very few photographers. People take pictures, but they are not artists. Photography is an art, not just the enthusiasm of a shutterbug. William Lemke is a throwback, a modern day reflection of the great Ansel Adams, who captivated generations of folks with his amazing black and white photography. Let's go inside and meet Bill and get the story behind his amazing collection. Hi, Bill. Thanks for letting us in.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It is a treat. I am a great Ansel Adams fan. I look at your collection and I said, oh my goodness, here he is again. So it's quite a tribute to your ability, but where did that come from?
Well, Ansel Adams was definitely a big influence on my photography, going all the way back to the 70s when I first picked up a camera in high school. I decided when I was a senior that maybe being an auto mechanic wasn't my future. Maybe photography is something I should pursue. And of course, when I started looking at photographs, it was Ansel Adams, Edward West, and Paul Caponegro, all the greats from the West Coast. And when I first thought about a career in it, I decided to change my route and go to Milwaukee Area Technical College to get an associate degree in photography. So that was my start. I started shooting film back in the 70s, of course, with 35 millimeter, and then I graduated to a 2.25 camera and eventually ended up using a view camera, which you can see in the background is the camera of choice now. And that's what Ansel worked with, large format view camera. And it just was one of those things where with the larger negative, I got more detail, beautiful tones. And so ever since then, I've been sticking with that.
In the 1990s, there was a big move to digital photography, but you don't work in the digital world. You still work with film. And I'd like you to talk about that a little bit because it makes a tremendous difference in the quality of the finished product.
Well, having started with film, and I grew to have a love for the darkroom. It was just a time of almost meditation where I could go in and just spend the day working on test prints and finally getting to a finished print. When digital came out, to me, it didn't have the same appeal. I kind of equate it to similarity between, or the difference between a vinyl album and a CD. The differences are subtle, but if you know what you're looking for, there is a big difference. There's a softness, there's a warmth, and I feel that way with photography. The other thing that really interests me about doing darkroom work is that when I go in to print a negative, I'll spend an entire day and I may walk out with 8 prints, I may walk out with 2 prints, or I may not even get a print finished in that day. Where with digital, there's something about the fact that you're basically reproducing. Once you get that file the way you want it, you can push buttons. I can make a couple prints a day. Digitally, I could make a couple hundred prints a day. I like the appeal of having more of a limited edition series.
I'd like you
But
to
I
talk.
still, go ahead. I was just going to say, I still really love the darkroom. That to me has so much appeal.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about black and white photography as opposed to color photography. There's just an amazing um, artistic talent that it takes to make black and white really pop and come to life.
I don't dislike color, but of course, when you start doing your own photography, you always start in black and white, and some people graduate to color. For me, I liked the fact that I was a step from reality. So I didn't have that extra step of color to add interest to an image. I had to make it work with simply with tones, with textures. So it was a challenge, and it was something that not everybody can do. I tend to visualize things in black and white. When I look at a scene, I can kind of see it in black and white, and I know how those tones are going to reproduce. And there's an archival quality more so in the past when it was a wet process with color. But black and white images are archival. They're going to last. They're going to be around for centuries, and we've already proven that with images that go back to the 1800s. But I do like that ability to take that step from reality and make an interesting image in just tones. What I also find interesting is that occasionally when I'm talking to somebody and they're looking at one of my photographs, they describe it as being color. They say, "Oh, I love the color of the trees. It's in black and white, but they're seeing color." So I guess I've achieved what I've tried to do is have people visualize something that may not even be there.
Creating a piece of art is one thing, but in your career, you have had the opportunity to take your artistic talents and put them to a practical scientific use. And I was wondering, maybe you could talk about that a little bit, about how you have helped the scientific community through your work.
Um, well, I have to work with chemistry when I'm working with my photographs, and I'm not sure how I've contributed to anything scientific, other than I've taken the artistic part of the photography and I've used that to do commercial work to help pay the bills. Because, as we all know, trying to make it as an artist is not the easiest thing to do. So I had clients throughout the years that gave me the privilege of traveling and still being able to pursue my black and white photography. So, in that way, I guess I've contributed to commercial success for some of the clients that I had, producing images of their products in a way that would help sell them.
I was thinking about your work in photographing different places uh, to document the change in the locations as it relates to climate change and other things.
Oh, okay. That was a project that I started when I started working with the U.S. Geological Survey back in 2010. And the project involved traveling through the Grand Canyon and rephotographing the Staten expedition. Back in 1889, 1890, Staten did an expedition through the Grand Canyon, and instead of surveying it, they photographed it. So they would go from river bend to river bend and view upstream and view downstream. And by doing that, they created this incredible record of images. The reason for them doing it was there was a plan to put a railroad through the Grand Canyon to get to the West Coast. And fortunately, that never happened. But Bob Webb with the U.S. Geological Survey got a hold of all these negatives, and he wanted to do a project going back and rephotographing some of the images from the exact same location. So not only was it just roughly in that area looking up and down river, but it was the exact location. So we would have to wander around with a photograph in our hand and find the rock that was in that photograph. And by doing that, we were able to show exactly where the existing plants were from over 100 years ago and how that had changed, and if there were new species of plants that actually moved into those areas, which indicated maybe the climate has changed as well, because now there's plants growing here that used to freeze, and now it no longer freezes. So, that was an incredibly interesting project, and I spent at least a half a dozen trips, Grand Canyon, Escalante Canyon, and also around Moab area, rephotographing some of these old images.
I have to ask you a question that I ask every artist. It fascinates me. Where do you draw your inspiration? What moves you, and how does a project start and develop and come to fruition?
I think part of it goes back to when I was a kid and my parents would take trips to Montana. And so as a very young person, I got really excited about nature and the environment. And so when I turned 16 and had a driver's license, where did I go? I drove to Montana. And I would go out there to go backpacking and hiking and just enjoy nature. Well, once I started making photographs, it's like, okay, these are places I really want to photograph. So I was inspired by the beauty of the West mostly. Um, uh, yeah, and growing up with parents that encouraged me to do that was very helpful. So to this very day, I still go out and photograph in nature. I include some man-made things in some of my more recent work, and I've been traveling to Europe, to Asia, and fascinated by the architecture that I see as well. So I think my inspiration comes from my travel, but I also have to give credit to my daughter, who, when she was very young, had a whole different way of looking at things. And I would look at them through her eyes and get very inspired by that.
The nature photography and Grand Canyon photography speaks for itself, but you're also an amazing portrait photographer, and your project with the deadheads fascinates me.
Well, that goes back to the 70s as well. I started going to Grateful Dead shows, and um, I love the music. But what I was really fascinated by is the audience. It was like this slice of culture that um, traveled throughout the country to follow their band and the music of the Grateful Dead. And so as I looked around, I thought, well, I really want to document this. I want to have some record of the people that are part of this audience. So back in the mid 80s, I started photographing deadheads. And to this day, I'm trying to relocate some of those people to rephotograph them more than 30 years later. And it's just turned into this incredible project, which we hope will eventually be a book. Fortunately, right now I submitted one of those images, actually a diptych, to the National Portrait Gallery, and I'm in a show that's at the National Portrait Gallery right now, and will
Oh,
travel
wow.
throughout the United States over the next couple of years. So that was quite an honor. They picked 46 people out of, I think, 1,600 applicants.
Oh, my. Speaking of art shows, we're in an era now where everybody's kind of hunkered down at home. And do you miss being out on the tour and seeing folks?
Yeah, in one way I do, because I do appreciate getting feedback from an audience. That's I work in my studio alone for the most part. I kind of live alone with my photographs. My wife gives me comments about them, but it's not like the general public walking by and getting an opportunity to hear how they feel about the work. It's very helpful.
Well, we really look forward to seeing you sometime at an art show. But in the meantime, thank you for letting us in the studio and for sharing your work with us.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
We want to thank you for watching this Thomas William Furniture Virtual Art Fair behind the scenes. Join us again for a look at another artist and their creation.